Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of the Duke Football Coverage Podcast, brought to you as always by Bull City Coordinators. You can follow us on our website, bullcitycoordinators.com. Follow us on Twitter at Duke FB Coverage. Our DMs are open. We are on Reddit and a bunch of other social media sites. You can find us, and we are everywhere that you get your podcasts. Now, our next guest played wide receiver at Duke from 1979 to 1981. And after his time as a Blue Devil, he went on to play in the USFL with the Birmingham Stallions. And those of you who follow me on Twitter know I enjoyed the reincarnation of the USFL, so we are going to talk about that. But our next guest is Ron Frederick. How are you doing, sir?
Doing well. Thank you for having me.
Well, thank you for taking the time to come on. We really appreciate it. Why don't you tell us what you're up to these days? What have you been doing since your football career ended?
Well, when I finished playing, I came to Raleigh and met with my uncle Larry Frederick, my father's brother, here in Raleigh. He owned an insurance agency, and I had interviewed with a couple of companies, Procter & Gamble and a few other ones, but they were based in Chicago and a few other locations far outside of North Carolina. And so I told my uncle, look, I think I'll just hang around the agency until I decide what I want to do. And I tell people I'm still trying to decide what I want to do. I actually took over the benefits side of his agency and partnered with my uncle and did that until 2012. And he passed away at that time. It was a full service agency, property, casualty, the whole ball of wax. And anyway, I ended up selling that agency. And for the last, I guess, 6 or 7 years, I've been an independent broker, still handle benefits, individual, group, some annuities, life insurance, things like that. But it enables me to kind of work at my own pace and gives me some time to do some other things outside of work.
Tell us what we should know about either life insurance or any type of insurance that we don't know. And I'll tell you, I'm a personal injury attorney, so I know a fair amount more about that than I'd probably like. But just tell our audience what they should know about maybe what kind of insurance they should have that they may not have. Well,
of course, life insurance is, I think, a necessity for someone, especially anyone that's got children, got a wife, with college education in the future, especially if the wife doesn't work, that's even a greater need for life insurance. Or if the wife works, then you need actually coverage on both. The thing that's really had me running around these days is the open enrollment period for the Affordable Care Act, which started November the 1st and runs until tomorrow. And going through the marketplace and trying to figure out subsidies and what type of coverage people can get can be complicated, and that's what really I've spent most of the last couple of months doing, just trying to help people, in the marketplace and make sure they've got their health coverage going into 2023.
And we could do a whole different podcast on insurance expansion and different options and where to look. And
sure. And then, a lot of people, there's term insurance and permanent insurance, which is universal life or whole life. I usually recommend term insurance because you get the bigger bang for your buck with that. And but if you see a need and you're going to want insurance, obviously through your 60s, 70s, and 80s, then you do need to look at a permanent plan, because term insurance is going to become astronomical premium wise. And if you were to purchase a permanent policy when you're younger, obviously those rates would remain the same as you get older. One other thing I've done a lot of recently, especially with rates increasing and the stock market not doing as well, are annuities. People, want to put their money in 3, 4, 5 year guaranteed tax deferred interest. And right now, that's at 4 to 5.5%. And people that are not, don't really like the risk of the stock market, that's a safe place they can put their money and certainly earn more than they would get at in a CD situation at a bank.
And that's a good point too, is, thinking about saving and planning for the future, right?
Sure.
How much do you start investing? And I think the correct answer is just start early. And
it really is. It really is. The value over time of compounding interest is unbelievable, and just put something away. We've encouraged my two daughters to do that, and they're both on the right path with their retirement, and obviously take advantage of any type of 401k, anything offered through your employer, especially when there's matching involved. That's just money you're leaving on the table if you don't take advantage of it.
And that's an excellent point, because it was something that I never thought of growing up. And when I started out as a lawyer, my wife was adamant, I don't care, you're going to put the maximum you can in the 401k. And the law firm I started out at, matched that. And, it's a tremendous growth vehicle.
It really is. It really is. And up until the last 3 or 4 years, with the stock market doing so well, you've read and seen a lot about 401k millionaires, which are people that normally would not have been in that situation, but they put money in it each year and have for a long period of time. And now those mutual funds and stocks that they've got their money in did really well. And I think it'll come back. It's we're in a down period now, but I think within the next couple of years, things will start looking brighter.
Right. And things come in peaks and valleys, and
do.
If you study trends in history, you notice that, and you got to have a long-term investment plan.
Right.
But let's switch gears a little bit and talk some about football.
Sure.
How old were you when you got into football? When did you start playing?
I started playing as a boys club, Wayne County Boys Club, Goldsboro, North Carolina. I was, I guess 7 or 8, maybe 6 or 7, midgets. And it's really funny because I made the all-star team my first year, but I was a defensive tackle. And I was probably the smallest defensive tackle that's ever played the position. But anyway, I ended up getting moved finally to defensive back and receiver as I got into my early teens. And I remember going from that period to 9th grade football, which was really my first serious football. We had a 9th grade team. And I told my father, who had played football at Wake Forest, when it was in Wake Forest, North Carolina, he was running back there, did real well. But I told him I was going to be a defensive back. And he said, you really need to think about an offensive position too, just in case. And I was adamant that I was just going to play defense. And I went out there to practice, and the receivers that we had out there and were just dropping the ball left and right. And the coach hollered out, do we have anybody out here that can catch the ball? And I kind of raised my hand and said, I think I can do it. And went over there, and after 4 or 5 routes, he said, we've got our receiver. And so from that period forward, my sophomore year, I made varsity and played 3 years in Goldsboro for Gerald Wisenhunt, who's a Hall of Fame, North Carolina Hall of Fame high school coach. And was fortunate, had a good quarterback that went on and did real well at Appalachian State. So that helped. And so that's how it all started.
Well, and then as I was doing some research on this, and I may have gotten it wrong, but it looked like you started out at ECU before you became a Blue Devil. Is that accurate?
You got it right.
Okay.
Pat Dye, and I'm probably one of the few players that has had the chance to play with 2 coaches that both won national championships. Played with Pat Dye and, of course, Steve Spurrier. I wasn't on either one of those teams, unfortunately, but Pat Dye recruited me heavily at East Carolina beginning my junior year. And we didn't throw it that much at Goldsboro, but he had seen enough that he really wanted me to come to East Carolina. And East Carolina at that time had a really strong program and routinely would beat the ACC schools, NC State, Carolina, Duke. And The other teams weren't really recruiting me heavily at all. But I was fortunate. I was chosen to play in the North Carolina East-West All-Star game the summer before my freshman year at East Carolina. I went ahead and committed, by the way, to East Carolina, to Pat Dye. He sat in my den with my parents and said, we really, really want you. And I just decided this, I want to go where I'm wanted. And but that summer I was in the North Carolina East-West All-Star game. I was fortunate. We had a coach that was very conservative, Ray Durham, who's also in the Hall of Fame. And but he decided for that game to open it up, and he brought in a couple of quarterbacks, great quarterbacks, Craig Browning and Alan Stevenson, and several receivers. And I was lucky enough that we ended up winning 38 to maybe, I don't know, 21, but I was named the MVP of the game. I caught 6 or 7 passes, 2 touchdowns. And at that game, the ACC coaches finally took notice, and we're down on the field. I remember Pat Dye put his arm around me and walked me off the field. And I probably had the chance to change my mind, but I had committed to East Carolina and still loved the school, wanted to give them a shot. Pat Dye said they were going to open up the wishbone offense, which is what he ran at the time, and start throwing the ball. And so I went on to East Carolina, and I ended up alternating with the senior starter running in plays. Just to give you an idea of what led me kind of to decide maybe I need to look at another college. I was the 3rd leading receiver that year, and I caught 5 passes. And I just decided, if I'm going to spend as much time as you've got to spend in college football, I wanted to enjoy it. And I was really running downfield trying to block, 95% of the plays. And I put out some feelers, and Wake Forest and Duke both offered me, a scholarship to transfer. Wake Forest had a new coach, John Makovic, who did fantastic there. He also was a very good passing, or had a good passing mind. And Mike McGee was at Duke, and a lot of people didn't understand why I went to Duke, because my dad had played at Wake Forest, and Wake Forest at that time, we knew Makovic was going to throw it, but my quarterback that was with me in the East-West All-Star game, Craig Browning, had already signed at Duke as a freshman, and I thought we'll put that combination back together at Duke that we had in the East-West All-Star game. So anyway, I'll condense this. Had to sit out 78. Well, that ended up being McGee's last year. They hired Red Wilson. And then 79, I actually led Duke in receiving with 29 receptions, which players get that now in 2 or 3 games. But Coach Wilson knew we needed to do something offensively, and he contacted Steve Spurrier, who had just been released at Georgia Tech, and said, I'm going to give the offense to you. It's you run it like you want to. And I mean, everything just fell into place for me. Steve Spurrier goes out to California and brings in Ben Bennett. And for my last 2 years, 80 and 81, I mean, some games we'd throw it 30, 40, 50 times a game, and just had a wonderful time. I ended up playing those 3 years at Duke. I caught 1 pass in at least 1 pass in the 33 games I played there. And when I finish, this will show you what passing or the changes in passing attacks in colleges. When I graduated, I was, I think, 3rd all time in leading receiver at Duke in 3 years of play. And somebody told me recently, I think you're out right around 17 or 18 now. So there's a lot of receivers that have come and gone since I played. But no, I was fortunate to play with Steve Spurrier as our offensive coordinator, certainly.
Well, you're the first guest on who played for Coach Wilson, and yes, I've read a lot of what Coach Spurrier has had to say about Coach Wilson.
Yes.
Tell us what he was like and what we as Duke fans should know about Coach Wilson.
Well, I'll tell you, he was as fine a man, integrity-wise, as you will ever meet. There are two types of college head coaches, really professional too, for that matter. There are the kind that are more they delegate, they make sure they've got great staff, and they let them run with it. And then there are the more hands-on type coaches that are actually the ones that are in there. Steve Spurrier is a hands-on hit when he was head coach. He's down there calling the plays. He's running the show. Red was more of the delegator type, but the thing that made him so special is he knew the kind of coaches that he needed to get under him. And he brought Spurrier in, who had been released, by the way, at Georgia Tech, and was told by the head coach at the time that Spurrier would never make it as a head football coach. And Spurrier had the last laugh with that one. And then on defense, he brought in Bob Matheson, who, if you remember, is famous for the Miami Dolphin 53 defense when they went undefeated in the NFL. And Bob Matheson's a former Duke player. A lot of people don't know that, but he was the linebacker coach for our defense, and we had, I think, Dick Hopkins, another good defensive coordinator. But Red just did a great job of fine-tuning what he would see on the field offensively or defensively. Again, he let his assistants run the show, but if he saw something that needed changing, he'd certainly step his foot in and make a change. The thing that was impressive about Red, and he took pride in this, is he had an incredible memory, and he rarely ever forgot a name. When he finished coaching at Duke, as a matter of fact, he was hired by the medical school as an ambassador, and he would go meet celebrities at the airport and pick them up and bring them to the Duke rice diet, which at that time was a real big thing. And they liked Red doing that because Red would remember these people's children's names, their wives' names, and every year when he'd pick them up, he would just say, John, how's little Sissy doing? And how's Johnny doing? And they were just surprised that he had that kind of memory. But he also used that in football to communicate with his players. He knew who he was talking to and what needed to be said.
Well, I was trying not to laugh when you said about Spurrier getting the last laugh against the Georgia Tech head coach. That was Bill Curry.
Yes, it was.
and Spurrier was 6-0 head-to-head against Curry after that. So
he was, and when Curry was at Kentucky, I think Spurrier was ahead maybe 60 or 70 to whatever, and they were running the Statue of Liberty with 3 or 4 minutes to go in the game. So it's hard to blame Spurrier, though. Curry had it coming.
Well, those things motivate you, and you don't let them go. Let me ask you a little bit about this before we get into Steve Spurrier. I could never, looking back at things, I think most people would say letting Coach Wilson go was a mistake. And my father certainly has beat that into me growing up. But what do you have any idea on kind of what led to that? He'd had 2 6-5 seasons, which, it back then wasn't anything you'd write home about, but certainly the way the program developed, that looked a lot better.
And we'll get into this with Spurrier, remind me if we don't, but my 1980 year, I think we were maybe 2-8 or 2-9. We played 11 games, so 2-9. But I saw the potential. Then my senior year, 81, we were 6-5, which now would have gotten us a bowl game. Back then, that didn't get you a bowl game. The following year, I believe they were 6-5, and finished beating Carolina in the last game of the season. I remember standing there. I was actually helping Coach Spurrier as a volunteer wide receiver coach between my NFL and USFL days. And I remember seeing Red Wilson's just so happy outside of the locker room, talking with the other coaches and players, and everybody was excited. And I saw Butters, our athletic director, standing off to the side, and he just kind of had a really concerned look on his face. I knew something was off. And everybody that's been involved has their. I think maybe the decision had been made earlier in the season, and he maybe felt like he was so far down that road that he couldn't turn back. I don't know what decisions had been made with others, or who was involved in the decision. But I think regardless, obviously, of what happened in that game or the last few games of the season, Butters had decided that he was going to make a change. I don't know if he felt like Red had reached maybe his pinnacle or his potential, but and he wanted to see if we could build on that. But I thought it was a mistake. The program, the next 3 or 4 years, my younger brother played at Duke, 3 years behind me, and they had some tough years too. I think they brought in maybe Steve Sloan and a couple of other ones. And I think they would have been better off leaving Red at the helm. Spurrier was leaving, but he still could have, brought in, I think he would have brought in someone else that would have done a fine job for him.
Well, speaking of Spurrier, let's stay on that for a minute. And I want to ask you a little bit about what it was like to play in his offense. But before I do that, I want to read this recap of a play that happened during a game when Coach Spurrier was offensive coordinator. During a game, Spurrier devised a new pass play on the sideline, which Duke ran for a touchdown on their next offensive possession. Coach Wilson had not seen the play before, and when he asked Spurrier what play he had called, the young assistant replied, "Touchdown, Coach." What was it like to have a guy who would create plays and cereal, Cheerios in the morning? I mean, what was he like to work with?
He was truly, and I've been at a couple of events. I was at a cocktail party that they had for him within the last year or two when he was getting inducted into the Hall of Fame as a coach. I think he was already in it as a player, National Collegiate Hall of Fame. And he asked me to get up and say a few words about my experience. And it was just truly an honor, a pleasure. I've never played for someone like him. I've got some great stories, and I won't tell them all. I just remember the first time I knew that he was really special was 1980, and we had gone down to Death Valley, Clemson, and they were a very good team. I think Spurrier had been our offensive coordinator for 2 or 3 games, and I knew his offense was innovative and creative, but I just didn't know the things that made him really special. And I saw it at that Clemson game. At halftime, he brought in the quarterbacks and receivers. We were down 17-10 at halftime, and he just made some adjustments. A lot of coaches, they panic and they said, we're going to try, we're going to put in these other plays, or we're going to try run the ball more, or try deeper routes, whatever. Spurrier said, no, our passing scheme is right, but I just want to make some small adjustments. Instead of 15 yards, Frederick, take this route to 18 yards. Or Cedric Jones was another wide receiver I played with, on this post route, take it to 15 yards instead of 20. Chris Castor, again, he was my roommate. We had some great receivers, but he just made these small adjustments to stretch the defense. And we went out in the second half against Clemson and went up and down the field against them. We beat them 34-17 in Death Valley. The next year, Clemson won the national championship. So I saw then, and we had some other games, even though we didn't win many that year, we had some other games where we were very, very close, and we were doing a lot offensively. And of course, then going into my senior year, we ended up having the winning season, and just had a blast playing with his offense. One thing, a couple of things that made him special. First of all, he put a lot on the quarterback to know what plays to audible to. He had no problem with a quarterback checking off on a play that looked like it was going to be more effective than the one that was called. And he did a great job of teaching and training. Obviously, I played with Ben Bennett, one of the greatest to ever play at Duke. So he did a great job with that. he also was great at looking at defenses for a quarter or two and really figuring out their weakness and then exploiting that in the second half, especially. And so just a lot of fun, just fun and gun offense is what he was known for. And I was fortunate to play for him.
Well, now, and he was in his mid-30s?
Oh, yeah.
I mean,
he was young. He was young. He would ask me sometimes to go with him to have a drink with Frank DeCenzo, who is a writer for the Durham Sun. And we would sit there talking with Frank DeCenzo, drinking a beer. And Spurrier's, like you just said, Spurrier's drawing these plays on a napkin and telling Frank DeCenzo what he was going to run that week, showing him this new play he had designed. I mean, that was just Spurrier. You felt like you were in a sandlot, when he's drawing plays in the dirt.
Well, how did he? I've heard a little bit about this from Randy Cuthbert, Clarkson Hines, Dave Brown, that, some good players.
Oh, yeah.
That Spurrier had a very unique way of motivating people. Could you talk a little bit about that, about how he would get the most out of his guys?
Yeah, he didn't mind. He didn't care if you were the superstar on the team or you rarely got to play. He would treat you, he could rip into you. And I mean, everybody's seen him on the sidelines throwing his visor down when a play doesn't go as expected or a player makes a mistake. And he was very quick in his correction, I'll put it that way lightly, of the mistake you've made, but then it was on to the next play. I've got a great motivation story from Spurrier. I remember Ben Bennett was a freshman at Duke, and Ben, as most quarterbacks are, had some arrogance. He stood up as a freshman in the locker room and told the entire team that by the time he left Duke, he was going to break all the NCAA passing records. Of course, he almost did. He broke most of them. But as a freshman, Ben obviously felt like he knew a lot about playing quarterback. And we were out there after 2 weeks of preseason. And Spurrier and Ben had started getting into some argument about a few plays that we were running. And Ben was talking back, and that was getting Spurrier madder and more upset. And finally, when practice was over, he said, Ben, come with me. Frederick, you and Castor, come with me too. And we go get in his car, and he drove us to his house. And he walks into his house, and he puts his hand around back of Ben's neck, and he walks him into the den, and he points at the Heisman Trophy on his television set and says, Ben, when you get one of those, I'll listen to you. But until then, you listen to me. Do you know it actually worked? Ben still would talk back, but he toned it down about 50%, and they ended up having a good, coach-player relationship, as good as to be expected. But that was Spurrier. He would do what needed to be done to make sure the guys were motivated. He also knew some guys needed just come on, let's go, and other guys needed him to get in their face. He knew the difference and the different personalities of his players.
Well, what you said about him making adjustments and changing. I remember when he was coaching at USC at the end of his career, and his best teams were when they had turned into a run-heavy defensive unit, which was so out of character for him.
That's true.
But it worked, and I think that goes back to your point about he's willing to make adjustments and change if it helps win games.
He is. He would do anything if he felt like it was going to exploit the other team's weakness. Look, I was a 5'10" wide receiver, and he saw me in practice throwing the ball before practice just with some other receivers, and it gave him an idea, and he ended up putting in 3 or 4. And most people call them trick plays. Spurrier really didn't call them trick plays because he practiced them just like he practiced our regular plays. I ended up throwing I think 6 passes. I completed 4 of them, and 4 of them were for touchdowns. So as a wide receiver, I threw 4 touchdown passes. That's all Steve Spurrier. I mean, he knew how to exploit the weaknesses of other teams. If that meant running the ball more, or I mean, we had running backs that he would get very involved in the passing attack, for instance, on teams that didn't do a good job of covering the runners out of the backfield. And so he was great at finding those weaknesses, no doubt.
How different was his offense back then in the 80s to anything you'd been around?
Completely different. Again, of course, at East Carolina, it was the wishbone offense, so that's a whole nother ball game. But my first year of eligibility at Duke, we ran a fairly conservative offense. Most of our pass patterns were, a curl, an out route, a corner route, a post route. Coach Spurrier put in so many more creative pass patterns that would really expose defenses. I remember one story that he tells often is when he first got to Duke, he saw the tape of my sophomore year, and we used to have a middle route when I'd go down about 15 yards and right across the middle. And I mean, I'd get killed, and but I'd hold on to the ball, and so I was able to develop a decent reputation because of that. But Spurrier thought, Frederick's not going to last long if this keeps happening. And so what he does is he takes Cedric Jones, the flanker on the other side, he sends him deep on the post, and he takes a tight end, Carl Franks, or sometimes he'd be a wing, and he'd drag him right in front of the linebackers to keep them tight, and it would just open up that middle route for me. And I ended up catching that was probably 70% of my receptions with that 15-yard middle route. And but he was just great at figuring out ways to exploit defenses, to get receivers open, running backs open, and he had that same creativity with our running attack. He's just a brilliant mind offensively.
Well, you talked a little bit about Ben Bennett already, and guys, look him up. He was a heck of a passer, had a lot of success in the Arena League. I think he's still coaching there, so go look him up, everybody.
Yes.
But you've mentioned Chris Castor a little bit.
Yes.
Who was, checking my notes, a pretty darn good wide receiver.
ACC Player of the Year in '82. Yes.
And a second-team All-American that year too.
Signed with Seattle.
A lot of us, don't. A lot of us younger folks probably don't remember him. Tell us what we should know about Chris.
Chris, I just saw him last week, a couple of weeks ago at a game, and we've stayed close friends. We roomed together for a couple of years at Duke. I think the world of the guy. Chris was extremely fast. He ran track in high school and was one of the top two fastest guys in the state his senior year in the 100. I think the other one was Kelvin Bryant, and we know how fast he was. Went on to Carolina and played in the USFL, and then the Washington Redskins / Commodores, I guess, or Commanders. But Chris, great hands, very fast, deceptive speed because he was so smooth. I remember they went to Tennessee, and Tennessee had some great defensive backs in 1982, playing in front of 107,000. And they were playing Chris rather tight. And it was in no time, Chris caught about a 60, 70 yard, maybe even longer than that post pattern, and just left them in the dust. And we saw a lot of that in '82. I remember we were at South Carolina. George Rogers, Heisman Trophy winner, was playing for them at that time. And Spurrier lined up on 4th and 1, and he had Chris in tight right behind the tight end. And it looked like we had two running backs in an I formation. So we were going to obviously hand off up the middle and try to get that 1 yard. And he sends Chris deep on a corner route, and Chris catches about a 60 or 70 yard bomb for a touchdown. So that's the combination of Spurrier's ingenuity and Chris Castor's talent. But just great guy. He ended up going to Seattle and was with them a few years. And I don't know if he got injured or what happened there, but just one of the great all-time receivers at Duke. Oh, of course, and my other good buddy, Cedric Jones, I think I mentioned him, played 6 or 7 years with the New England Patriots. Another great wide receiver.
Now, I want to ask you a little bit about another guy that you mentioned earlier that you played with and came back to coach at Duke as an assistant and as head coach, and that was tight end Carl Franks.
Yeah.
And we all remember, And, we could probably do a whole panel discussion about why Duke football got to the point that it got to, that I don't think entirely should fall on head coaches,
Right.
Goldsmith, Franks, or Roof.
Right.
There was a lot more to it than that. But tell us a little bit about what Carl was like as a teammate.
Oh, Carl, I wouldn't call him quiet, but Carl was rather reserved. He's a smart guy. Did well in school at Duke. As a roommate, fun guy to be around. Just a good all around guy. He was serious about his coaching, and of course his playing also. He took it certainly very seriously. And that situation with Carl, there were a lot of things going maybe against him at that time. I don't know if he didn't feel like he could really implement a Spurrier type offense at the time he was there. I don't know if the players or the talent wasn't there for him to do that, but I don't think it was just that. I think it was also maybe the support from the administration at the time, and that was tough. I really felt like when they first hired Carl that he would do real well. I thought he would come in and put in a Spurrier-esque type offense and be successful, but it just didn't go that way. But Carl went on from that and got back into assistant coaching and coached with Spurrier again in the USFL, and has done extremely well. So I'm proud of him.
Yeah, and I've had some players from that era who coached under him or who played under him come on, and people can listen to the Todd DeLamielleure interview and go over that.
Yeah.
And there, I think this about Carl Frank's time at Duke is he was trying to fairly distribute the blame. I think he was in some respects trying to be Coach Spurrier, when you can't be Coach Spurrier if you're not him, right? There's only one of them.
Right.
And I think he would probably admit maybe the way he handled a lot of things, like all of us, if you could go back and undo some things, you'd do them differently, or redo some things, you'd do them differently. Todd had mentioned some of the way that Coach Franks treated the players, but I also think when he gets there, he probably realizes how far the administration has let the football program fall in comparison to the rest of the conference and the rest of the college football as a whole, right?
I agree with you.
And so you get there, and let's say you have a plan to do some certain things, and then you look around and you realize, well, this isn't going to work.
Yeah.
And the administration's not doing what it needs to do. And you're seeing it now, and we can talk about this whenever you want, but
sure.
What they've done from 2008 till the present with Coach Cutcliffe, with Coach Elko, and particularly the assistants that they are spending the money on to keep now.
Yes.
We didn't have that back when Goldsmith was the head coach, because when he lost Bowl and the other assistant Heimerdinger,
he just brought up the point I was going to make about Goldsmith. He was more of the administrator type head coach. He had two great assistants under him. When they left, you see what happens when you can't replace that talent. And so, and I think Carl probably had some issues there too, like you said.
Right. And I think we've talked about this. The Section 17 guys have talked about this. Fans don't show up enough. But, when you ignore your football program for about 40 years, that's what's going to happen, right? And it's going to take time to fix that. And I don't care how good of a coach you are, it's not going to be an easy job.
Right.
So we've talked about your teammates. We've talked about the guys that you had the good fortune to work with and to be coached by. You went to the USFL after your time as a Blue Devil ended. Tell us a little bit about what that was like.
Well, I had one stop before then. I was approached during my senior year by some NFL teams, and went through some workouts. Ended up being led to believe that I was going to be drafted in the draft. I was not drafted, but the moment the last round ended, I got a phone call from Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and they wanted me to sign with them as a free agent. So I signed with Tampa Bay Buccaneers, went through 2 mini camps with them, was able to have some success at both mini camps, went into preseason and felt like I was off to a really good start. Doug Williams was our quarterback back then, who ended up winning, a Super Bowl at Washington. You talking about a quarterback that could throw the ball hard. Doug would throw a 6-yard slant in just as hard as he'd throw a 60-yard bomb, and the receivers would come in after practice and would have little crosses all over our body where the end point of the ball hit us. But anyway, so I played in 2 preseason games, caught a pass against Washington, and felt pretty good about the way things were going. In that third week, I got injured, hurt my hand. And right at that time, too, that we were going through a lot of turmoil. It was the first NFL strike that was looming, 1982. And we, as a show of solidarity before the games, the entire teams would walk across the field and shake hands, just to show the players were together, in this. And I think the owners and coaches kind of saw the writing on the wall. Towards the end of preseason, they started releasing a lot of the free agents and later round draft choices. I got released. And sure enough, that year, the NFL did strike in 1982. Came back to Duke. Spurrier was in his last year as head coach at Duke. He asked me to volunteer coach his wide receivers until I decided what I wanted to do from that point on. And midway through the season, of course, then Chris Castor was, I can't take any credit for it, but he was a senior that year and had a great year at wide receiver. But midway through that season, I got a call from Birmingham Stallions. Raleigh Dotch was the head coach of Birmingham. He had been the offensive line coach of the Pittsburgh Steelers in the 70s when they won all those Super Bowls with Bradshaw. And he called and said that they had my rights as a former Tampa Bay player, and he wanted to offer me a contract to come down there and try out with the team. And so I ended up signing with Birmingham, wanted to give it one more shot. And I thought I was going to be down there in Birmingham with maybe 10 to 15 wide receivers, competing for 6 or 7 spots. I got down there and there were 38 wide receivers, former NFL guys, college guys, just from everywhere. And we had a 2-day mini camp in Birmingham. And from those 38, they were going to cut it down to 12 to take to 3 weeks of preseason at Daytona Beach. And I had a good 2-day mini camp, was in the among the 12, went down to Daytona Beach, had some good weeks down there as a wide receiver and punt returner, and ended up making the final 6, and then eventually made the final 4 active roster players. We had 2 practice squad wide receivers, and that year was the starting wide receiver and punt returner. And then the following year, I was mostly punt returner. We brought in Jim Smith, another former great wide receiver for Pittsburgh Steelers, who ended up pretty much taking my spot. But I just loved my time down there in Birmingham. We had a really good team, especially my second year. Got to play with guys like Steve Young, Jim Kelly, Herschel Walker, Doug Flutie. All those guys started in the USFL. And just a great memory for me, those 2 years. Got married my second year in 84. And my wife and I really enjoyed our time there. So that was my career. The league started you could see the writing on the wall. Some teams were struggling. San Antonio was having trouble meeting payroll, and some others. And I had injured my ankle severely in the last game of the season, the second year. And I don't know, I just felt led that it was time for me to get out and do something else. And so I decided to walk away.
So how many years was it you played in the USFL?
Played 2 in Birmingham. Yep, 2 years.
And tell us a little bit about being a punt returner, especially back then when they probably didn't care about player safety as much.
I'm telling you, I was going to say it's probably the most thankless position in all of sports. It's better now because these special team coaches really do a good job of making sure the punt return team is out there with a purpose, to block and make sure you give that guy time. Back in the 80s, a lot of teams would not even put a punt return team out there. They would leave the defense on the field except for the punt returner. Well, those defensive guys are ready to get off the field. They've done their job. They've stopped the other team. They don't care about running down the field and blocking anybody. And so, and also at the same time, and we had some kind of old school coaches in Birmingham, they didn't really believe in fair catching often. And so unless you knew you were going to get killed, you better try to run with it. And it was deadly. I remember a couple of times I got hit one time so hard at Soldier Field in Chicago. I remember I was running to the Chicago sidelines instead of the Birmingham sidelines. One of our other receivers had to run me down and catch me and turn me around and start running back to the Birmingham sidelines. So I certainly got my bell rung a few times, no question about it.
Well, let me ask you, did you enjoy seeing the USFL come back last season?
Man, I loved it. I've done a few podcasts with some folks that are involved with the new USFL and went down to Birmingham. They had a hub this first year, and I think they're going to expand that to at least 2 or 3 hubs this coming spring. But I went down to the opening night, first game with Birmingham, and was there with some other friends that were involved with the Stallions in a suite there, and just had a great time. Brought back some wonderful memories too. I drove around the Birmingham area to some old stomping grounds.
Well, what was it like watching that? And some friends of mine would say, well, the offense is really simple. It's basic. And I said, well, yeah, but they're putting a new league together. They don't have a lot of time to get it together. So yep. I get that. But I enjoyed watching it, and your old team won the title.
Birmingham won the title. We had actually some good players. As a matter of fact, there are several players from the league that are still in the NFL today. I think a few of them might have been moved to practice squads, but I think the Dallas return guy actually played for Birmingham, punt return, kickoff return guy. And there's some talent down that in the USFL, certainly not across the board like the NFL, but they've got to walk before they can run. And overall, I was actually pretty pleased, especially over the season, with the improvement in play, especially on the offensive side of the ball.
I enjoyed watching it, and I'll watch it again, much to my family's chagrin. But I enjoyed it. It was a lot of fun, and Skip Holtz did a really good job.
I talked to him that night before the game, and I was reminding him of some players he coached when he was at East Carolina that I happen to know, and I was just so happy for him after what he had gone through. I think he was at Louisiana and a couple of other locations, but we were afraid, or Birmingham was afraid they might lose him, but I've heard from some people that he's not all that interested in getting back into the recruiting that's required with college, especially with the portal and what's going on that with players moving in and out of teams. And he's got a little more stability. As long as the league is stable, he's got certainly more stability down in Birmingham.
Well, and he's been successful pretty much everywhere he's been, so he knows how to coach. And if I'm trying to put myself in his mind at his stage of the career, there's not so much left for him to prove. And
good point.
You don't want to go somewhere and only have 3 years and kind of be looking over your shoulder, again.
Exactly.
So I think, not every move that you make going somewhere else is always the right move. So
that is so true. And I'm always shocked when I see some, especially college coaches, that are doing so well in a good environment. I'm talking to Coach Cutcliffe here. Coach Elko. The coaches, a lot of them will keep looking up, to take that next step. Well, sometimes that's not a good move. It's not. That next step is a bad step.
Mm-hmm.
Stay where you're appreciated and where you're successful, unless you just really have this drive to be somewhere else. And I hope that's his attitude. Certainly, I'd love to have him at Duke as long as we can keep him there.
Well, and I think, and I talked about this on the Lauren Brownlow interview I think I'm going to post it tomorrow. We're recording this on a Wednesday, and the interview that I did with Lauren's going to drop tomorrow. And we talked about how good Coach Elko is at controlling narratives.
Yeah.
I've really been impressed with his interviews, how he communicates. And he does it in a subtle way when he gets asked a question, and he just kind of casually, calmly steers it where he wants to go and talk about.
I had picked that up too.
And the thing that impresses me about it is you don't get the sense that he's reading from a script or that he's got talking points. It just comes off as very natural.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably why all these players really love playing for him, is because he seems to be a very, very genuine person who invests in the people who are around him.
He does. And when you first see him, he looks like this big, husky, old school style football coach, and he's got some of that in him, but he's also brilliant. I mean, I truly believe he knows the game inside and out, and he knows the little things to say to motivate players and his staff. I've seen him, jump on our best players just as easily as he might jump on a player that's not as well known. It doesn't matter to him. He's going to get his point across, what needs changing and changing immediately. I told someone the other day, on YouTube, I've seen a few of his pregame and halftime speeches to the team. And I said, like I told you earlier, I played for two coaches that both won national championships. I played for some great coaches. I don't know that I've ever heard a coach give pregame speeches as good as his are. And I would love to play for the guys. So I know those guys, those players, feel that same way. They're motivated by him. He also sees when there's a mistake, when there's a problem, he sees it and he works immediately to fix it, whether it's defense or offense. But I have total confidence in him. If I see something out there on the field that is not, like I think it needs to be, or what, I don't worry like I used to, because I know he's going to address it. He sees it, and he's certainly a fantastic coach.
And one of the things I think he did that was smart was, well, there's a lot. I mean, we could talk about Coach Feely for a long time, but a lot of people have talked about Coach Feely. So one thing that I want to talk about a little bit differently is it seems to me like he's invested, at least this round, in hiring coaches he thinks can become assistant coaches, he thinks can become head coaches.
I agree. Our offensive coordinator. I mean,
that's exact. And I have had former players tell me, if you're a defensive guy, you have to hire an offensive coordinator who's going to be a head coach, and you just have to accept that you're going to have to replace him.
Yes.
And the fact that he's done that, and, Coach Johns is going to get calls if he's not getting them already.
Exactly.
So the fact that Coach Elko's secure enough to bring in a guy who is as smart and as capable as Coach Johns says a lot.
It does. It does. One of my biggest complaints about our team over the last 3 or 4 years is, without getting into a lot of detail, I thought our offense had gotten stale, and our running attack especially very predictable. And Coach Johns, it's not only creativity in his play calling and our passing offense, but our running game is very creative. We have a lot of misdirection, things that Duke needs to do to be successful. And it has shown throughout this season. I mean, we had a fantastic running game. I give Coach Johns a lot of credit for his offense.
And on that, I think the way that they used a slower tempo was really smart.
Yep.
because if you'd seen the last several years, the defense would just get worn down because we were snapping the ball within 5 to 10 seconds.
I agree.
And that offensive line they've got is an older line.
Yeah.
Let them get themselves set, let them see what they need to see, and then just, play some smash mouth football and
That's right.
win in the trenches. And it worked. And those running backs showed some really good vision this year. You talked about, cutbacks and some reads that they had.
Yeah.
They made adjustments when those gaps didn't open.
True.
It was impressive.
It was. I love watching them play. And being a wide receiver, you think I'm just dedicated to the passing game. I love a good running attack, and because it opens up the passing game, really. And Coach Johns was able to install that in the offense, along with his passing attack. And I enjoyed all the games this year, even the ones that the refs took away from us. But anyway.
Well, that Georgia Tech one, I did a rules recap. I think that was technically the right call. And the reason I say that is, and I'd have to go back and read it again. I feel like I'm interpreting, cases from the 1800s here, but it had something to do with the way one of the wide receivers came forward before they came back and caught the ball, I think. And I just remember reading that and saying to myself, that's an awful lot to expect 18, 19-year-old adults to keep in their head. But the Carolina one, I've seen chop blocks, and that ain't a chop block.
No, not just that. That's not a roughing the passer either. Our guy rolled with the quarterback to try to keep him from getting hurt. I could go on and on. How about there on our very last drive in the game, they show it up on the video board. The defensive back has actually got his arms around our wide receiver trying to get on the in route, and no call. It was blatant. And no call.
Yeah, we could talk
in field goal range. So anyway.
Yeah, we could talk about every time Dwayne Carter got held and it wasn't called, but we'd be here for hours.
Yeah, that's just you live and move on.
I know. But this has been a great talk. I've really enjoyed it. I've learned a lot about some great guys who were associated with the program, who helped make Duke football what it's become now. And I'm just curious, because it's clear that you're still involved with the program. You're very invested in it. Looking back on your time as a Blue Devil, what are you most proud of?
I'll tell you I'm proud of what the university represents. I think it is a true student athlete environment there. The award, and I was the ACC Player of the Week one year, and some other things that I've done, but the award that I'm most proud of is the All ACC Academic Team Award that I got my senior year. I just think Duke and what it represents for a student athlete is something that you just take with you the rest of your life. I've never been embarrassed to say that I played football at Duke, even during our rough years, because I know Duke is just, it's a different, there's just a different environment. There's different expectations academically from their athletes, and for them to be able to combine that with now a successful football program, which look, Coach Cutcliffe did in his early years when he came to Duke. It just, I'm just beaming. I'm so proud of them, and that's what I'm proud of. I'm proud of how Duke combines the academic with the athletic experience.
Well, and that degree and that alumni network, I'm sure is helpful. I've talked about this a lot on the podcast, but I would tell anybody considering going to WNL in Lexington for law school to go there, because the alumni network is unbelievable.
Yep. So, and it is.
But tell us a little bit about how maybe guys who transferred out, but they have a Duke degree still, how that's going to help them going forward.
Well, it just opens doors. A lot of people talk about, fan support at Duke or Duke football, but you've got to realize Duke is a national institution. It's not a local regional institution. These teams like UNC, NC State, most of their fans are very close by. Duke is all across the country, and that helps these guys when they go back to Oklahoma or Texas or Florida or Michigan or wherever, because there are going to be Duke people there. Because it is such a national school, even though our student body is not nearly as big as some of the other in-state schools. They are spread out throughout the country, and there's always going to be people where you can have a point of contact, to maybe help you or to guide you in the right direction if you're looking for employment opportunities.
Well, that is one thing. Everybody who is considering going to any school, graduate, postgraduate, for undergraduate, postgraduate, whatever, keep that in mind. That alumni network makes a huge difference.
It does. I saw where the Blades defensive back from Miami is transferring to Duke through the portal. And I made a comment in this group that I'm in. It's actually the Dan Thomas is the group that he's in with me. And I said, it's amazing that he's transferring here, because I know we're not competing with Miami as far as NIL dollars. And I know they're giving their guys, tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands. I said, but then Miami doesn't have the Duke name and what it represents and what that will represent for him when he leaves Duke. And that's truly the way I feel about it.
I think that was the 8th or 9th turnover we created against the Hurricanes this year. So it was.
That would be number 9, right?
I think so. I stole that. I got to give credit. I stole that from Ben Swain. So
that's good. That's good.
Yeah. So many other things I could say about that game. It was just so beautiful.
It was great.
But one thing, if you've listened, everybody gets a chance to have an open mic at the end, because you were kind enough to come on and answer a bunch of questions that I had. So I like to give everybody who comes on a chance to talk about whatever is important to them.
Well, just based on what, and we were just talking about this earlier, but I do think it's important for people to turn out and support Duke, and take the extra step or do what you need to do to, get to the games that might be tough to get to. I'm going to the Military Bowl right after Christmas, and I've been in touch with a lot of my teammates, and we're going to have a good crowd there. I just hope that the rest of the Duke Nation is as supportive as they would be, for instance, if it was the basketball team in some type of event like this. And so I would love for Duke. I don't know that Duke will ever be known as a football school, although one time way back when it used to be, way back when. But it would be nice for there to be, if not parity, at least known as a competitive football program. I think Wake Forest has achieved that in the last several years. For Duke to get to that level, and Coach Elko certainly has them there this year, but to maintain that, I just think that's going to do wonders for Duke and for athletically, nationally. I'm just glad to be a fan watching it happen.
Well, 2 quick thoughts on that, and I'll take them in reverse order. As far as Wake, I think that both Duke and Wake should be able to average between 5 to 8 wins a year. And I know that range is kind of weird to say because it doesn't mean a whole lot, but
I get it though.
Right. Each season, right? Because each season you can have injuries, you can have balls bounce a little bit of a different way. You can have
stay away from those 2-win, 3-win seasons. That's right.
Exactly. And a 5-win year may not be a bad thing if you lose a lot of close games.
That's right.
Right. And so I think your worst should be about 5 wins, and your best should be 8 or more. And I think somewhere between that 5 to 8 spot is where schools like Duke and Wake should fall every year. Yep. Depending on, how old the team is, depending on how the injuries go, depending on what kind of guys you might be able to get through the portal.
Right.
So I think that those things are doable and possible. We just have to be realistic about it. We also have to be patient as fans, and we have to be supportive as fans, particularly to the players.
Right.
And on the Military Bowl, guys, I would love to be there. And I need your sympathy on this. Okay. I want you to, I really want you to just feel for me.
Okay.
I'm gonna watch it, but not in person. It's gonna be at a resort in Mexico, and I know that you guys,
you're forgiven.
you guys, I know you're like, gosh, Bird, that's just rough. I can't believe it. We're so sorry. That's going to be miserable for you. So I'm just I'm going to make that sacrifice though for you guys.
Oh, okay. All right. I get it. Get it.
No, we've started, our kids are getting a little bit older and they don't, not that Christmas doesn't matter, but they're getting a little bit older and and we're trying to do something a little bit different for them. And so what we're doing now, this will be the second year we've done it, is we try to take, about 3 days and we go, someplace warm and just, let them have a little fun, let them travel, especially after being cooped up all through COVID and we couldn't do as much.
Sure.
So, but again, I'm making that sacrifice for you.
All right. You're forgiven, man.
Okay. Well, Ron, thank you for coming on. I really enjoyed it. This was a great talk. It was a lot of fun. My wife actually listens and she loves the Coach Spurrier story. So I know she's going to enjoy this. And Dad, I know you're listening. Hang in there. Keep listening to your doctors and your family supporting you. We're all there for you and we're all thinking about you. And I know a lot of people who listen to this podcast are too. And we've got more interviews planned, trying to schedule them. I got to get back to work on locking a couple of these down, but we'll do as many as we can in season 3. It's fun as always. Follow us on our website, bullcitycoordinators.com. Follow us on Twitter at DukeFBCoverage. Our DMs are open. Email me at bullcitycoordinators@gmail.com. Let's get a win in the Military Bowl, get to 9 wins. And as always, go Duke.